The air was thick with anticipation as news spread that Bill Maher, the infamous liberal satirist, had extended a public invitation to Karoline Leavitt. Not for a friendly debate, not for a casual chat, no, for a televised showdown on his own turf. "Let's see if the little Trump spokesperson can handle some real questions," Bill had smirked during his opening monologue, drawing cheers from his audience. Producers loved it. Viewers craved it. Bill Maher was the king of snark, the champion of wit. Few conservatives dared step onto his stage without leaving humiliated. But Karoline wasn't like the others. When the invite reached her office in Washington, Claire read it aloud, skepticism clear in her voice. "He wants you live, no edits," she said. "It's a trap." Karoline leaned back in her chair, considering. "Good," she said, a slow smile forming. "Let's spring it." Trump's inner circle had mixed feelings. Some warned her not to legitimize Maher's platform. Others saw an opportunity. "If you can hold your ground," Claire whispered, "you won't just survive. You'll shatter the narrative." Karoline nodded, resolve hardening. This wasn't just about defending herself. It was about standing for everyone mocked, belittled, and erased by a culture that thought laughter replaced reason. She prepared carefully. Not with zingers, not with personal attacks, but with facts, calm, and an iron will. The night arrived faster than anyone expected. The HBO studio gleamed under blinding lights. Audience members packed in, primed to laugh at the naive conservative who thought she could keep up with Bill. Backstage, Karoline adjusted her navy blue blazer and touched the small silver cross around her neck. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. "Remember," Claire said softly as she handed Karoline a thin file. "Facts win. Stay calm. Make them feel their own emptiness." Karoline smiled faintly and stepped toward the stage. Bill Maher waited, seated behind his wide desk, a shark's grin plastered across his face. As she entered, the audience burst into a mixture of cheers and mockery. The trap was set, but Karoline wasn't walking into it. She was about to turn it against him. Bill Maher wasted no time. The moment Karoline sat across from him, the jokes began. Sharp, practiced, cutting. "So," Bill sneered, tapping his desk, "do they give you the script before you come out, or do you memorize it backstage?" The audience erupted in laughter, the familiar rhythm of his show rolling like thunder. Karoline smiled lightly. Not sarcastic, not defensive, just amused, as if she had already anticipated this childish opening. "No script," she said calmly. "But thanks for reminding everyone how predictable this setup is." The audience chuckled nervously, not because of a punchline, but because they weren't used to seeing someone not take Bill's bait. Bill arched an eyebrow. He shifted gears fast, moving from jokes to political jabs. "You defend a man, Trump, who doesn't even know basic facts about his own policies," he said. "And you expect us to take you seriously?" Karoline leaned in slightly. "President Trump," she corrected coolly, "built the strongest economy in modern American history before the pandemic hit. The facts are public." She paused, letting the silence hang uncomfortably. Bill tried again, reaching for a punchline. "Yeah, by giving trillion-dollar tax cuts to billionaires." Karoline didn't flinch. "By lifting wages for working-class Americans," she said, voice steady. "Minority unemployment at record lows. Manufacturing jobs rebounding." The audience was quiet. No laughter, no sarcasm, just facts, delivered with precision. Bill looked momentarily thrown off, but quickly recovered, waving dismissively. "You people love cherry-picking stats," he said, "but reality isn't a rally." Karoline smiled again, that same maddening, patient smile. "Reality," she said, "is what millions of Americans live every day, not what's edited into a soundbite for applause." The audience shifted, some exchanging glances. This wasn't the comedy bloodbath they had been promised. This was something else, something they hadn't seen in a long time. A young woman who refused to fold under pressure. Bill leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "Fine," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Let's talk reality. Let's talk January 6th. You want to defend that too? He thought he had her cornered. He thought this was the knockout blow. But Karoline's eyes didn't waver. She sat up straighter, her voice low but powerful. I'll defend peaceful protest. I'll never defend violence. And I'll never apologize for Americans having the right to ask questions about their government. She looked directly into the camera. Even when people like you tell them to shut up and laugh. The audience gasped softly. Bill opened his mouth to respond. But nothing came out. Because deep down he knew. For the first time on his stage, he was losing control. Bill Maher wasn't used to losing the rhythm of his own show. For years he had controlled the room with sarcasm, flattening opponents with a few sharp jokes, letting the crowd's laughter carry him to victory. But tonight felt different. Karoline wasn't just surviving, she was reversing the current. Bill tapped his pen anxiously against the desk, forcing a tight smile. "All right," he said, voice a bit higher pitched than usual. "You want to sound serious? Let's talk serious." He leaned forward dramatically. "You defend an administration that separated families at the border," he said. "How do you sleep at night?" The audience erupted into claps and cheers, sensing a heavy blow had been delivered. Karoline waited patiently for the noise to die down. She didn't rush. She didn't fumble. When the room finally settled, she spoke, calm, measured. "I sleep knowing that securing a nation's border isn't cruelty. It's responsibility. And I sleep knowing that President Trump enforced the same policies your friend President Obama put in place first." A visible ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. Bill's face twitched. He hadn't expected her to pivot so cleanly, or to expose the double standard so effortlessly. He tried another angle. "You people love playing the blame game," he said, jabbing his finger at her. "But you never own your mistakes." Karoline met his accusation head on. "No administration is perfect," she said simply. "But pretending the problem started in 2017 is intellectual dishonesty. Something I thought you opposed." The jab was subtle, but lethal. Bill's audience, trained to laugh at easy targets, found themselves uneasy, unsure when they were supposed to react. Bill knew he needed to pivot. Fast. He leaned back in his chair and flashed his classic smug grin. "So what are you really here for, Karoline?" he asked. "To defend a clown and his circus, or to audition for Fox News?" The laughter rolled again, but thinner this time, weaker. Karoline didn't blink. "I'm here," she said quietly, "because people like you have spent decades mocking real Americans, and someone needs to remind you. Mockery isn't courage, laughter isn't leadership, and cynicism doesn't solve anything." The room grew still. Bill stared at her, a flicker of real anger passing behind his eyes. For the first time, it was obvious. He was outmatched. Karoline wasn't trying to be funnier than him. She wasn't playing his game. She had brought a different weapon entirely. One he wasn't prepared to fight. And worse, the audience was starting to notice. Bill Maher shifted in his seat, his trademark smirk faltering for a split second. The audience could feel it. The king of late-night sarcasm. Wobbling. He tried to recover, leaning forward with an exaggerated casualness. Okay, he said, forcing a chuckle. "So you're here to save America from comedians?" A few laughs scattered around the room, but it was clear the energy had changed. Karoline, poised and steady, offered a small smile. "Not from comedians," she said. "From people who think mockery is a substitute for debate." The line landed hard. Bill tried again, falling back on safer ground. He pulled out a note card, waving it theatrically. "Your boss," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "told people to inject bleach. You still defending that?" Another cheap shot, another expected move. Karoline didn't bite. She calmly leaned back and said, "Hyperbole from a man who saved millions of lives by pushing Operation Warp Speed, bringing vaccines to market faster than anyone thought possible." Silence. Even the liberal-leaning audience couldn't deny the fact. Bill's nostrils flared slightly. He pivoted once more. "You're young," he said, changing tactics. "You'll learn. The world's not as black and white as Trump's speeches make it sound." Karoline's smile didn't waver. "I know it's not black and white," she said, "but it's also not as hopeless as you sell it every night." The blow was surgical, not cruel, not loud, but devastating. The audience murmured, not the raucous laughter Bill had built his empire upon, but something more dangerous: doubt. For the first time, they were wondering if maybe, just maybe, Karoline had a point. Bill glanced at his producer, who frantically gestured for him to wrap up the segment early. He ignored it. He still believed he could salvage this. Still believed a well-timed joke could undo the damage. Still believed, wrongly, that Karoline had brought a sword to a gunfight. He hadn't realized she had brought truth. And that was something even laughter couldn't kill. Bill Maher tapped the side of his coffee mug, a nervous tic he couldn't hide anymore. Karoline sat poised, her hands neatly folded, as if she had been expecting every move he made, and was just patiently waiting for him to exhaust himself. The camera zoomed slightly closer. Viewers at home could feel it too. The atmosphere was shifting, and it wasn't shifting in Bill's favor. "So tell me," Bill said, forcing another grin, "how do you reconcile working for a man who says he loves America but cozies up to dictators?" It was supposed to be the final blow. The audience leaned forward, desperate for the slam-dunk moment they were used to. Karoline didn't flinch. She leaned in, her voice clear. "I reconcile it the same way Americans reconcile paying taxes in a broken system, because leadership is complicated and progress is messy." She locked eyes with him. "And because talking tough from a TV studio," she continued, "isn't the same as navigating real-world diplomacy." The crowd fell into a heavy silence. No laughter, no cheering. Just the sound of truth settling like a heavy stone in the room. Bill blinked, stunned. He tried to interrupt, but Karoline pressed on. "President Trump didn't send pallets of cash to terrorist regimes. He brought North Korea to the negotiation table without firing a single shot. He rebuilt the military and held NATO accountable." Each word was a hammer strike. Each point drove deeper into the narrative Bill had built his brand on, and it was cracking. He chuckled nervously, trying to brush it off. "All right, fine," he said. "You've got your talking points." Karoline tilted her head slightly. "No," she said, her voice razor-sharp. "I have reality. You have applause signs." The audience gasped. Some even laughed, not at Karoline, but with her. Bill's mask slipped entirely for a moment. He wasn't the dominant host anymore. He was a man losing his audience, and losing to a 27-year-old woman who came armed only with facts and resolve. The producer motioned again from the wings, cut to commercial. Bill hesitated. For a moment it looked like he might concede. But pride is a powerful thing. Bill Maher wasn't going down without swinging wildly, even if all he had left were broken jokes and worn-out cynicism. Karoline saw it, and she was ready. Because the real knockout wasn't a single blow. It was the slow, devastating realization playing out across America. Bill Maher's kingdom was crumbling, and Karoline Leavitt was the one holding the mirror. Bill Maher tried desperately to reclaim the rhythm. He leaned forward, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite land. "Come on," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "Isn't it cute?" "She thinks tweets and tariffs rebuilt America." A few loyal audience members laughed, but the sound was hollow, thin. The old magic was gone. Karoline didn't even blink. She simply adjusted the silver cross necklace around her neck, leaned slightly closer to the mic and said, "Tweets didn't rebuild America. Hard work did, common sense did, and ordinary people, the ones you mock every Friday night, did." Her voice was calm, but her words hit like a battering ram. Bill smiled wider, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. "You sound like a Hallmark card," he said. "The world's a little more complicated than bumper sticker slogans." Karoline nodded thoughtfully as if she agreed. "It is complicated," she said, "but it's not so complicated that you can't tell right from wrong." She paused, her gaze steady. Mocking faith isn't edgy. Sneering at patriotism isn't brave. And laughing at hard-working Americans doesn't make you wise. The room was dead silent. Even the cameramen froze, unsure whether to zoom in or stay still. Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He reached for another note card, anything. But his fingers fumbled slightly, betraying the sweat forming on his palms. He tried again. "You really think Trump is the answer to all our problems?" he asked, voice rising with frustration. Karoline tilted her head. "I think freedom is," she said. "And I think President Trump fought for that freedom harder than anyone you've ever bothered to give credit to." The audience stirred. This time not in protest, but in a kind of stunned reflection. The producer waved frantically again. "Commercial! Cut now!" But Bill ignored it. He couldn't accept losing, especially not here, not like this. He leaned closer, voice sharper. "You think you're better because you don't tell jokes?" Karoline's answer was soft and devastating. "I don't think I'm better," she said. "I think I'm serious about the country you forgot how to love." The studio gasped, audible, heavy. And for the first time in his long career, Bill Maher had no comeback. No joke, no punchline, just silence. And in that silence, Karoline smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in certainty. She hadn't come here to win a shouting match. She had come to reveal the emptiness behind the laughter, and she had succeeded. The stage lights burned hotter than before. Or maybe it was just the heat building around Bill Maher, who now sat rigidly behind his desk, lips pressed into a tight line. Karoline stayed relaxed. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to insult. The truth was doing all the work for her. Bill shuffled another card in his hands, but it was useless. His notes, his jokes, his gotcha lines, all of them were crumbling in the face of something he hadn't encountered in years. Real conviction. He leaned forward once again, almost pleading. "You really believe Trump made America better?" Karoline nodded once, firmly. "I believe he reminded Americans that they mattered, that their faith, their work, their families mattered." The audience listened, silent and tense. Karoline continued, her voice unwavering. "You treat patriotism like a punchline. You treat faith like a weakness. You treat working Americans like background characters in your monologues." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But they're not the joke. They're the heart." Bill opened his mouth, ready to fire back, but Karoline wasn't finished. "And every time you laugh at them," she said, "you reveal more about yourself than about them." The blow wasn't loud. It wasn't vicious. It was surgical, precise, cutting deeper than any insult could. Bill's hands clenched around the edges of his desk. The audience, once so quick to laugh at his side comments, sat stone-faced. Behind the scenes, producers frantically whispered, "Wrap it! Wrap it now!" But it was too late. The moment was already slipping away from Bill, slipping into Karoline's hands. She leaned forward slightly, almost kindly. "I didn't come here to trade jokes," she said. "I came here because someone needed to stand here and say it plain. The people you mock are the ones who built this country, and they're not laughing anymore." Thunderous silence. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, but heavy, meaningful. Bill Maher sat back slowly in his chair, his eyes dark, his usual clever retorts lost somewhere he couldn't reach. He tried to summon a grin, a joke, anything, but found nothing. Karoline, without raising her voice once, had taken his stage, and there was no getting it back. Bill Maher sat stiffly, his usual easy smirk gone, replaced by a thin, forced smile. Karoline Levitt remained steady, not gloating, not triumphant, just unshakably calm. And the audience? They felt it. The shift wasn't just on stage. It was in the room. It was in the air. It was in the uncomfortable way some audience members avoided eye contact with each other. It was in the soft coughs, the tense shuffling of feet. Because deep down, they realized they had been brought here for a roast, but what they were witnessing was a reckoning. Bill finally managed a nervous laugh. Well, that's one way to spin it, he muttered, reaching for the old armor of sarcasm. Karoline smiled, but there was nothing mocking in it. I don't have to spin anything, she said. The truth stands on its own. Bill waved his hand, dismissive. Truth, he scoffed. Everyone claims to have it. Karoline leaned slightly forward, voice soft but cutting. The difference is, truth doesn't need a laugh track. The blow hit hard. The audience reacted with a sharp intake of breath, a sound louder than any applause or laughter could have been. Bill's hand hovered over his coffee mug, then dropped. For the first time in the evening, his shoulders sagged slightly. He knew it was over. Karoline glanced briefly at the audience, speaking now not just to Bill, but to everyone watching. Mockery won't fix a broken economy. Sarcasm won't secure a border. And jokes won't heal a divided country. She stood slowly, not rushing, not running, owning the moment. I didn't come here to out-joke you, Bill, she said. I came to remind America that cynicism isn't strength. The crowd, stunned, sat frozen. No heckling, no applause signs needed. Just raw silence, the silence of people realizing they had witnessed something real. Karoline turned toward the camera, her voice clear. You laughed at us for years. You called us stupid, bitter, irrelevant. She paused, eyes steady. But tonight you heard us. And with that, she walked off stage, leaving Bill Maher sitting alone under the bright, unforgiving lights. The king of late night left speechless. And America, watching from their living rooms, phones, and laptops, knew it too. The old game was over. A new voice had arrived. The moment Karoline stepped off stage, the ripple effect began. Producers scrambled in the control room, their headsets buzzing with panicked chatter. Do we cut the broadcast? Do we spin it? How bad does it look? But it was too late. Social media had already exploded. Clips of Karoline's calm dismantling of Bill's sarcasm flooded X, Instagram, TikTok. One video, only seconds old, was already trending. Karoline destroys Bill Maher without raising her voice. Comments flooded beneath it. This is how you win, with facts, not insults. Bill Maher just got exposed on his own turf. Epic. Karoline Leavitt is the future, calm, deadly, and smart. Bill, meanwhile, remained seated behind his desk, staring into nothing. The applause signs blinked desperately, but barely a handful of audience members clapped, and even that sounded forced. His producer approached quickly. We should wrap, he whispered. Bill nodded stiffly. He tried to pull himself together for the outro, but everyone could see it. The confidence was gone. The invincible image cracked. The king dethroned, live on national television. Meanwhile, backstage, Karoline's team was flooded with calls and messages. Fox News anchors texting congratulations, political figures posting supportive comments, even some liberal commentators, shocked by the raw effectiveness of her performance, quietly admitted online. You don't have to agree with her to recognize what she just pulled off was masterclass. Claire, Karoline's assistant, beamed as she read the flood of mentions. You just broke late-night TV, she whispered. Karoline only smiled softly, adjusting the small silver cross at her neck. It wasn't about breaking anything, she said. It was about telling the truth. And in an era drowning in noise, the truth had landed like a meteor. Bill Maher's staff filed silently out of the studio, heads down, the usual post-show celebration nowhere in sight. Producers texted emergency meetings, writers huddled, whispering about damage control. But some knew the truth they couldn't spin. Bill Maher hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost the audience's trust. And Karoline hadn't just won a debate. She had claimed a space many thought young conservatives could never hold. The studio lights dimmed, but the echoes of what had just happened would ring far beyond that stage. 2 hours after Karoline left the stage, her name dominated every trending list. Karoline Leavitt. Bill Maher exposed. Truth over laughter millions had watched it unfold live. Millions more were now watching the clips, the replays, the slow-motion collapse of a man who once ruled late-night television. Inside conservative circles, Karoline's performance was hailed as the blueprint. Major commentators called it calm devastation. Proof that facts still win in a sea of noise. A new kind of conservative, fearless but respectful. Even neutral voices, journalists who had long mocked Trump loyalists, admitted she didn't shout, she didn't insult, she simply stood there and told the truth. And the truth won. Meanwhile, at HBO headquarters, damage control meetings ran late into the night. Bill Maher refused to speak to reporters. Behind closed doors, he blamed the producers, the audience, even the lighting, anything but himself. But his staff knew better. They had seen the truth too. Bill Maher's era had ended the second he realized jokes weren't enough anymore. Across the country, something stirred. People who had felt mocked, belittled, erased, suddenly felt seen, suddenly felt heard. It wasn't about agreeing with every word Karoline said. It was about the fact that she showed up, stood her ground, and refused to apologize for believing in things bigger than herself. At the White House, Karoline sat quietly in her office, the soft hum of her phone vibrating with congratulations she hadn't yet answered. Trump himself had posted on Truth Social. Karoline Leavitt just proved why the left is terrified. She crushed Bill Maher with facts, not jokes. A total win. Claire entered, smiling wide. "You did it," she said simply. Karoline looked up, her expression calm. "I didn't do it for applause," she said. "I did it so they'd know. You can laugh at us, you can underestimate us, but you can't silence us." Outside, Washington buzzed under the stars. And somewhere in America, in diners, living rooms, and college dorms, young conservatives who had been afraid to speak up found themselves sitting a little taller. Karoline hadn't just exposed Bill Maher. She had exposed the whole game. And for the first time in a long time, the silent majority realized maybe they didn't have to stay silent anymore. The rules had changed, the standard had shifted, and it wasn't the loudest voice in the room that won anymore. It was the truest. Tonight wasn't just about one debate. It wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt standing up to Bill Maher. It was about something bigger. It was about the power of staying calm when mocked, the strength of standing firm when the world laughs, and the quiet courage of telling the truth when it's easier to shout back. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't trade insults. She didn't play the game they expected her to lose. She showed that in an age of noise, cynicism, and cheap applause, authenticity still wins. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded all of us that the strength of a nation isn't measured in who shouts the loudest, but in who holds the line, who stands for what's right, even when it's not easy. At Surprising Stories, we celebrate these moments, when someone dares to flip the script, to expose what others thought would never be seen. Because the real victory isn't in a headline. It's in the hearts changed, the courage sparked, and the truths that refuse to be silenced. If you believe courage still matters, stay with us, because this is just the beginning. Thank you for watching. And never forget, one voice, armed with truth, can change everything.